The scorching sun hung like a merciless judge over Quartz Hill, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878. As Madeline Zimmerman stumbled toward the town's only public well, her parched throat burning with each labored breath. 3 days of travel through unforgiving desert had left her canteen empty, her skin blistered, and her once fine dress caked with dust. Madeline's fingers trembled as she gripped the well's stone edge, her eyes pleading with the stout woman who controlled access to the precious water. "Please," Madeline whispered, her voice cracking, "I have money." The well-keeper, Mrs. Abernathy by the crude wooden sign beside her, crossed her arms over her substantial bosom. "Not enough, I reckon. Water's scarce this summer. $2 a cup." Madeline reached into her pocket, feeling the meager coins there. 50 cents, all that remained after thieves had ambushed her stagecoach 2 days back. "I only have—" "Then you only have disappointment," Mrs. Abernathy cut her off. "Move along. You're holding up paying customers." Behind Madeline, a small line had formed local townsfolk with coins readily in hand. No one spoke up for the stranger in their midst. No one except the tall figure who had just dismounted from a dust-covered buckskin horse. "That seems mighty steep for water that belongs to the whole town, Mrs. Abernathy." Madeline turned to see a man removing his worn leather gloves, tucking them into his belt. Broad-shouldered and sun-bronzed, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to the harsh realities of the frontier. His eyes, green as spring grass, regarded the well-keeper with cool assessment. "Mind your business, Grant Irving," the woman huffed. "Town council approved my rates during the drought." "Approved highway robbery, more like," Grant replied, unhooking a canteen from his saddle. He stepped forward, nodding respectfully to Madeline. "Madam." Without hesitation, he uncorked his canteen and emptied the contents into the tin cup Madeline clutched in her trembling hands. The water sloshed over the brim, clear and cool, the most beautiful sight she'd seen in days. "There," Grant said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Drink slowly. Too much at once will make you sick." Mrs. Abernathy's face reddened. "You can't just—" "I believe I just did," Grant replied mildly, replacing the empty canteen on his saddle. His eyes never left Madeline's face as she sipped gratefully. "Now, I'd like to fill my canteen. I'll pay your $2, though we both know it ain't right." Madeline lowered the cup, having forced herself to drink in measured sips despite her desperation. "Thank you," she said, her voice still raspy but stronger. "I don't know how to repay such kindness." Something in Grant's expression softened. "No need for repayment. Not everyone in Quartz Hill is as selective with their charity as Mrs. Abernathy here." The well-keeper snorted but accepted Grant's coins, filling his canteen with obvious reluctance. "Where are you headed, miss?" Grant asked. "Zimmerman. Madeline Zimmerman," she replied, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "I was traveling to Tucson when our stagecoach was robbed. The driver and other passengers continued on, but I needed to find my brother. I was told he settled near here." Grant's expression grew serious. "Walking alone is dangerous in these parts. What's your brother's name?" "Michael Zimmerman. He wrote about starting a small ranch." A shadow crossed Grant's face. "Miss Zimmerman, I think you'd better come with me. We need to talk, but not here." He glanced meaningfully at the gathering crowd of onlookers. Fear clutched at Madeline's heart. "My brother is he." "Let's find somewhere to sit," Grant said gently, offering his arm. "You look about ready to collapse, and this isn't a conversation for the street." Madeline reluctantly took his arm, her legs unsteady as they walked toward a small establishment with a weathered sign reading Sullivan's Cafe. Inside, Grant guided her to a corner table and signaled the proprietor. "2 coffee and whatever's warm from the kitchen, Tom." "Coming right up," the heavyset man replied, eyeing Madeline curiously. Once seated, Grant leaned forward, his voice low. "Miss Zimmerman, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your brother Michael passed away 3 months ago. Fever took him quick. He'd only just started building his place west of town." The world seemed to tilt around Madeline. Michael, her only family since their parents died, gone. The brother who'd promised to send for her once he was established. The reason she'd left Philadelphia and everything familiar behind. "No," she whispered, "that can't be. I received his letter just 6 weeks ago." "Mail's slow out here," Grant said gently. "I'm truly sorry. I didn't know him well, but folks said he was a hard worker, had big plans." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes, but she fought them back, conscious of the curious glances from other patrons. "What am I to do now? I have nowhere to go, almost no money." The cafe owner arrived with steaming plates of stew and cornbread. "On the house," Tom said gruffly, setting them down. "Any newcomer to Quartz Hill deserves at least one warm meal before deciding if they want to stay in this dust bowl." Madeline managed a weak smile of thanks, though food was the furthest thing from her mind. Still, when the aroma reached her, her stomach cramped painfully, reminding her it had been nearly a day since she'd eaten. Grant watched her take a tentative bite. "Your brother's land, it's still there." "Nobody's claimed it yet. There's a small cabin, not much more than 4 walls and a roof, but it's something." Hope fluttered briefly in Madeline's chest. "His land. But surely there must be debts, claims." "He paid cash for the parcel," Grant explained. 40 acres with a creek running through the north end. No mortgage, no liens. The property taxes won't come due until next spring. If you can prove you're his sister, his only kin, the land would be yours by right." Madeline's mind raced. She had Michael's letters, her identification papers miraculously still in the hidden pocket of her skirt despite the robbery. Could she possibly make a life here, alone in this harsh territory? "I don't know the first thing about ranching," she admitted. Grant nodded. "Few do when they start. I could help you get settled, show you the basics. My place borders your brother's land to the west." "Why would you do that? You don't know me." A half smile played at the corner of Grant's mouth. "Let's just say I believe in being neighborly, and this town could use more good people. Too many are leaving because of the drought." Madeline studied him, trying to discern any hidden motives. His eyes held steady, open, without guile. Still, she'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with expectations. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Irving, but I couldn't impose Grant," he corrected. "And it's no imposition. I'd be a poor excuse for a neighbor if I let your brother's sister fend for herself. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I owe Michael. He helped me round up strays last winter when my ranch hand broke his leg." Madeline managed a few more bites of stew while considering her limited options. Return east with barely enough money for food, let alone passage. Seek employment in this town where she knew no one. Or accept this stranger's help and try to build something from her brother's unfulfilled dreams. "Could I see the property first?" she asked finally. Grant nodded. "We can ride out there today if you're up to it. It's about 4 miles. "I've never ridden a horse," Madeline admitted, embarrassed. "Then you'll ride with me," Grant said matter-of-factly. "Barton can handle us both." An hour later, Madeline found herself perched uncomfortably in front of Grant on his buckskin gelding, her body tense as they rode out of town. Despite her discomfort, she couldn't help but marvel at the landscape. Harsh as it was, the desert held an austere beauty, rocky buttes rising dramatically against the endless blue sky, saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels, and occasional splashes of wildflowers defying the arid soil. "There," Grant said eventually, pointing to a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. "That's Michael's place, or yours now, I suppose." The cabin was modest indeed, weathered pine boards forming a simple rectangle with a pitched roof and a small porch. A corral stood empty nearby, and the beginnings of a barn remained unfinished, its frame reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. As they approached, Madeline felt a strange connection to the place. Michael had built this with his own hands, had dreamed here, had died here. "It's not much," Grant said apologetically as he helped her down from the horse. "It's more than I had an hour ago," Madeline replied, approaching the cabin slowly. Inside, the space was Spartan but tidy. A bed against one wall, a table and 2 chairs, a small cast iron stove. On the rough-hewn mantel above a stone fireplace sat a daguerreotype, the same one Madeline had in her luggage. Their family, taken when she was 16 and Michael 20, their parents standing proudly behind them. "He kept it," she whispered, touching the frame gently. Grant remained respectfully by the door. "There's a trunk with his things. I helped the doctor clear out anything that might. Well, after the fever. The rest is as he left it." Madeline nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. This would be her home now. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. "The creek has water year-round," Grant continued, giving her a moment to compose herself. "Good soil in the lowland for growing vegetables. The previous owner planted some apple trees about 10 years back. They're finally bearing fruit." Madeline turned to him, decision made. "Will you teach me?" "Everything I need to know to make this work." Grant's expression was solemn. "I will. But I won't lie to you, Miss Zimmerman. It's a hard life, especially for a woman alone." "I'm not afraid of hard work," she replied. "And please call me Madeline. If we're to be neighbors, we shouldn't stand on formality." "Madeline," he said, her name sounding somehow different in his deep voice. "Let's get you properly settled then. We can bring your things from town tomorrow." "My things are with me," she said, gesturing to the small bag she'd carried. "The rest was on the stage coach. I doubt I'll see it again." Grant's jaw tightened. "Then we'll have to see about getting you some essentials. Can't have you sleeping in that." He nodded at her travel-worn dress. "I have very little money," Madeline reminded him. "The general store extends credit to landowners," Grant replied. "And you, Miss Madeline Zimmerman, are now a landowner in Quartz Hill." For the first time since learning of her brother's death, Madeline felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this wasn't the end of her journey, but the beginning of something unexpected. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Grant insisted on staying until he'd stocked her fire and made sure she had provisions for the night: coffee, beans, jerky, and hardtack from his saddlebags. "It's not much of a welcome dinner," he apologized. "It's more than enough," Madeline assured him. "Your kindness today, I don't know how I'll ever repay it." Grant stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dying light. "No repayment necessary, but I'll be back at first light to show you how to tend that stove properly. It gets cold at night, even in summer." After he left, Madeline sat alone at her brother's table in her brother's cabin, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Grief and exhaustion finally overcame her, and she fell into a dreamless sleep, still fully clothed atop the rough blankets of what was now her bed. True to his word, Grant returned at dawn, bringing with him a basket of fresh eggs, a loaf of bread, and a young milk cow. "She's gentle," he explained as Madeline stared in disbelief at the placid brown jersey. "Name's Buttercup. She was Michael's, actually. I've been keeping her at my place since. Well, she needs milking twice daily. Thought you might like to have her back where she belongs." Madeline approached the cow cautiously. "I've never milked a cow before." "Then that's your first lesson," Grant said, retrieving a bucket from his saddlebag. "No time like the present." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and hard work. Grant proved a patient teacher, showing Madeline everything from milking Buttercup to repairing fence posts, from identifying edible desert plants to handling the old rifle Michael had left behind. "You need to be able to protect yourself," he insisted, positioning her hands correctly on the weathered stock. "Coyotes will take your chickens if you let them, and there are still renegade Apache bands in the hills." Madeline struggled with the rifle's weight but was determined to master it. Each day brought new challenges, new aches in muscles she didn't know she possessed, but also a growing sense of accomplishment. The vegetable garden she'd started was showing promising sprouts. The cabin was becoming more home-like with small touches wildflowers in a mason jar, a patchwork quilt purchased on credit from the general store, curtains sewn from flour sacks. Grant came every day, sometimes staying only long enough to check that she was managing, other times working alongside her until sunset, helping with tasks too demanding for one person. They fell into an easy rhythm, their initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable conversation and occasional laughter. Madeline learned that Grant had come west after the war between the states, seeking a fresh start after losing his family's Virginia farm to taxes. He'd worked as a cowhand, a freight driver, and briefly as a deputy before winning his ranch in a poker game. "The only time in my life luck favored me at cards," he admitted. In turn, she told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her father's watchmaking shop, about Michael's decision to seek his fortune in the West after their parents died of influenza within weeks of each other. "I was engaged once," she confessed one evening as they sat on her porch, watching lightning flicker in distant clouds, "to a banker's son. The match pleased my father greatly." "What happened?" Grant asked, his face unreadable in the gathering darkness. "I discovered he was already married," Madeline replied simply. "To a woman in Boston. Apparently, Philadelphia was just a convenient stopover for his business travels." Grant's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "Some men don't deserve the title." "It was a blessing, really," Madeline said, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. "I might never have found the courage to leave Philadelphia otherwise, might never have seen this." She gestured to the vast starlit sky above them. Their eyes met briefly, and Madeline felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She looked away quickly, focusing instead on the silhouette of a coyote loping along the distant ridge. The next day, Grant didn't come, nor the day after. Madeline told herself she was relieved to have time to herself, to prove she could manage alone. But by the third day, concern overrode her pride, and she decided to walk to his ranch to check on him. The journey took longer than expected, the summer sun beating down mercilessly as she followed the crude trail Grant had shown her. When she finally crested a small rise and saw Grant's ranch spread before her, a sturdy two-story house, a large barn, and several well-built corrals, she hesitated, suddenly uncertain of her welcome. Before she could decide whether to continue, a man emerged from the barn, not Grant, but a wiry, older Mexican man who spotted her immediately. "Señorita Zimmerman," he called, walking toward her. "I am Carlos, Señor Grant's foreman. He is not well, I am afraid." Alarm shot through Madeline. "What happened, Rattlesnake?" Carlos explained grimly. "2 days ago, while mending fences on the north boundary, the doctor has been, but the fever is high." Without hesitation, Madeline followed Carlos to the house. Inside, it was cool and surprisingly well-furnished, not opulent, but comfortable, with solid oak furniture and colorful woven rugs covering the plank floors. Carlos led her upstairs to a bedroom where Grant lay pale and sweating, his right arm swollen and mottled with angry red streaks extending from his wrist to above his elbow. "He is sleeping now," Carlos said quietly. The doctor left medicine, but he needs someone to stay with him to keep the fever down. My wife would come, but she is visiting our daughter in Tucson. I'll stay, Madeline said immediately. Tell me what to do. For the next 3 days, Madeline barely left Grant's bedside. She bathed his fevered brow with cool cloths, coaxed water and broth between his cracked lips, and changed the poultice on his snake-bitten wrist as the doctor had instructed. When delirium took him, she held his uninjured hand and spoke soothingly until he quieted. Carlos came and went, tending to the ranch and checking on them, but the primary care fell to Madeline. She slept in short snatches, her head resting on the edge of Grant's bed, always alert for any change in his condition. On the 4th morning, she awoke to find Grant watching her, his green eyes clear for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're here," he said hoarsely, his voice rough from disuse. Madeline straightened, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "Carlos told me what happened. I came to check on you and stayed." Grant's gaze traveled over her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the loose tendrils of hair escaping her once neat bun. "How long?" 4 days, she answered, pouring him a glass of water. "The doctor says you were lucky. The snake wasn't fully grown and Carlos got the venom out quickly." Grant accepted the water gratefully, his fingers brushing hers as he took the glass. "Thank you," he said, his gaze holding hers, "for staying." Something unspoken passed between them, a current of feeling neither was prepared to name. Madeline looked away first, busying herself with straightening his blankets. "You should rest more," she said, professional once again. "I'll bring you some broth." As Grant recovered, Madeline continued to care for him, though she insisted on returning to her cabin each night once the immediate danger had passed. Carlos drove her in the wagon, then returned for her each morning. By the end of the week, Grant was well enough to sit on his porch, watching as Madeline and Carlos worked in the vegetable garden nearby. "You've got a natural talent," Carlos observed as Madeline expertly transplanted tomato seedlings. "The land responds to your touch." Madeline smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I've always loved growing things, even if it was just window boxes in Philadelphia. There's something miraculous about coaxing life from the soil." From his vantage point, Grant watched her the gentle way she handled the fragile plants, the contentment in her expression as she worked. Something had shifted between them during his illness, a tentative warmth that went beyond neighborly kindness. When she returned to her own place that evening, Grant found himself counting the hours until morning, when she would return to check on him. The house seemed emptier without her presence, the rooms hollower somehow, Carlos noticed. "The señorita brings light to this house," he remarked casually as he helped Grant back inside. "It has been too long since there was a woman's touch here." Grant didn't respond, but Carlos's words echoed in his mind as he drifted to sleep. The following day, Grant insisted on accompanying Madeline back to her cabin, despite her protests that he wasn't strong enough. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough," he said firmly. "Besides, I need to see how things are at your place." In truth, he'd been worried about her managing alone again, especially after Carlos mentioned seeing fresh Apache tracks to the south. The local tribes were largely peaceful now, confined to the reservation 50 miles away, but occasional bands still roamed, sometimes desperate enough to raid isolated homesteads. When they arrived at Madeline's cabin, Grant was relieved to find everything in order. Buttercup greeted them with a plaintive moo, eager to be milked after Carlos's less gentle attentions during Madeline's absence. The vegetable garden showed signs of Carlos's care as well, though some young plants were wilting in the relentless sun. As Madeline busied herself with Buttercup, Grant examined the cabin's defenses with a critical eye. The door latch was flimsy, the windows uncovered. Too easy for anyone to break in. "We should strengthen your door," he said when Madeline returned with a pail of fresh milk. "And maybe add shutters to the windows." "Is there danger?" she asked, setting the milk aside to strain. Grant hesitated, not wanting to frighten her unnecessarily. "It's always best to be prepared out here. The territory is safer than it was, but still wild in places." Madeline nodded thoughtfully. "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said, changing the subject. "That first day at the well, why did you help me? You didn't know who I was." Grant leaned against the porch post, considering. "My mother raised me to believe a man's character is revealed in how he treats those who can't help him in return," he said finally. "And no one should be denied water in the desert." "Is that the only reason?" Madeline pressed, her gray eyes searching his face. "No," Grant admitted softly. "There was something about you standing there, exhausted but still proud. I've seen that kind of courage before. It's rare." Color rose in Madeline's cheeks. "I was terrified, actually. I'd nearly convinced myself I'd die of thirst in sight of that well." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Grant replied. "It's continuing despite it." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see a cloud of dust approaching along the trail from town. "Are you expecting visitors?" Grant asked, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "No," Madeline said, apprehension tightening her voice. As the rider drew closer, Grant relaxed slightly. "It's Sheriff Dawson," he said, recognizing the badge glinting on the man's chest. The sheriff reined in his horse, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss Zimmerman, Irving, glad I caught you both." His expression was grave. "Had some trouble last night. Marshall's stagecoach was robbed about 10 miles east of town." "Anyone hurt?" Grant asked. "Driver took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live. Passengers were roughed up some." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "The thing is, one of the passengers recognized the bandits. Says they're the same ones who robbed his coach 2 weeks back, near where you were held up, Miss Zimmerman." Madeline paled. "I didn't see their faces clearly. They wore bandanas. One of them had a distinctive voice, according to this fellow. Real deep with a Georgia drawl. Said he called another one Emmett." The sheriff looked at Madeline. "Ring any bells?" Madeline nodded slowly. "Yes. Yes, I remember that voice. He was the leader, I think." "That'd be Harlan Booth," the sheriff said grimly. "He and his gang used to work the Texas Panhandle before the Rangers got too hot on their trail. Looks like they've moved west." He turned to Grant. "Just wanted to give you both a warning. They've been hitting isolated homesteads, too. Might want to keep your eyes open and your powder dry." After the sheriff departed, promising to send deputies to patrol the area more frequently, a heavy silence fell between Madeline and Grant. "Perhaps I should stay here tonight," Grant suggested carefully. "Just as a precaution." Madeline hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd feel safer," she admitted, "but you're still recovering. You should take the bed. I can make a pallet by the fireplace." "I'll sleep on the porch," Grant insisted. "Better vantage point if anyone approaches." As dusk settled over the desert, Madeline prepared a simple supper while Grant reinforced her door with a sturdier bar and fashioned makeshift shutters from spare lumber he found in the unfinished barn. They ate by lamplight, the atmosphere between them charged with an awareness neither acknowledged openly. Madeline found herself noticing small details about Grant she hadn't before: the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted higher than the other when he smiled, the careful precision with which he handled even mundane tasks. After supper, Grant excused himself to check the perimeter while Madeline washed the dishes. When he returned, he found her sitting on the porch steps, gazing at the stars. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She moved over silently, making room beside her. For a time they sat without speaking, listening to the nighttime chorus of cicadas and distant coyotes. "Are you afraid?" Grant asked finally. "A little," Madeline admitted, "but not of staying here. Strange as it seems, I feel more at home in this cabin than I ever did in Philadelphia after my parents died." She glanced at him. "Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all," Grant replied. "Home isn't always where you start out. Sometimes it's where you finally find yourself." Madeline considered his words. "I think Michael felt that way too. His letters were full of plans for this place, orchards, cattle, maybe horses eventually. He loved it here." "And you?" Grant asked softly. "Could you love it too?" The question seemed to hold layers of meaning beyond the obvious. Madeline felt her heart quicken as she met his gaze. "I already do," she said simply. Grant's eyes dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, a silent question in his expression. Madeline held her breath, uncertain, yearning. The moment was shattered by a sharp crack from the darkness, unmistakably a rifle shot. Grant moved instantly, pushing Madeline down and shielding her with his body as another shot splintered wood near their heads. "Inside," he ordered, pulling her up and practically carrying her through the door. Once inside, he barred it swiftly, then grabbed Michael's rifle from above the fireplace. "Douse the lamp," he instructed, his voice calm despite the danger. "Then stay low and away from the windows." Madeline extinguished the lamp with shaking hands, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the faint glow of the banked fire. "Is it them?" she whispered. "The stagecoach robbers, maybe," Grant replied grimly, positioning himself beside a window. "Or it could be Apache." Either way, they picked the wrong cabin to target. From outside came a man's voice, thick with a southern drawl. "We know you're in there, lady. Come on out nice and easy and maybe we won't burn your little shack down around you." "Booth," Grant muttered. "Madeline, listen to me. There's a loose floorboard under the bed, Michael's hiding place. There should be a small Derringer pistol there. Get it and stay hidden." She crawled across the floor, feeling beneath the bed until her fingers found the loose board. Inside the small cavity was indeed a Derringer, along with a pouch of coins Michael must have hidden before his death. She took only the pistol, replacing the board carefully. Outside, Booth called again. "Last chance, lady. We just want whatever valuables you got and maybe a hot meal. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Grant fired through the window, his shot answered immediately by a barrage from the outlaws. Bullets thudded into the cabin walls, one shattering the window and showering glass across the floor. "There's at least 3 of them," Grant said, ducking down to reload. "Maybe 4. They're trying to circle around back." Madeline clutched the Derringer, its small weight offering little comfort against the terror gripping her. "What do? We hold them off until dawn," Grant said firmly. "The shots will have carried to my ranch. Carlos will have heard them, he'll bring help." Another volley of bullets peppered the cabin. One of the outlaws shouted in pain, indicating that at least one of Grant's shots had found its mark. "You're gonna pay for that," Booth roared. "Emmett, get the coal oil. We'll smoke him out," Grant cursed under his breath. "They're going to try to set the roof on fire. I need to stop them before they get close enough." "How?" Madeline asked, horrified at the thought of being burned out. "I'm going out the back window," Grant said, checking his revolver. "Stay here, keep the rifle. If anyone tries to come through that door or the front windows, shoot them." "Grant, no," Madeline grabbed his arm. "You're still weak from the snake bite. Let me go, they don't know you're here." "They're expecting just me." "Absolutely not," Grant said firmly. "I'm not risking you. And I'm not risking you," Madeline countered. "Not after spending days keeping you alive." The determination in her eyes gave Grant pause. Before he could respond, a new sound cut through the night, the thundering of multiple horses approaching fast, accompanied by shouts. "That's Carlos," Grant said, relief evident in his voice. "And it sounds like he brought company." From outside came confused yelling as the outlaws realized reinforcements had arrived. Gunfire erupted again, but this time directed away from the cabin. "Sheriff's Department," came a familiar voice. "Drop your weapons." The firefight was brief but intense. When it finally fell silent, Grant cautiously approached the door. "Irving, Miss Zimmerman, you folks all right in there?" Sheriff Dawson called. "We're unharmed," Grant responded, unbarring the door. Outside, the scene was illuminated by lanterns carried by the sheriff's posse. Two bodies lay motionless on the ground, while a third man, presumably Booth, sat wounded, his hands bound behind his back, guarded by a deputy. "Carlos rode into town like the devil himself was chasing him," the sheriff explained. "Good thing my deputies and I were already out looking for these vermin." He nodded toward the captured outlaw. "That's Booth all right. One dead, one's Emmett Walsh, others still unknown. There was a fourth who got away, but he won't get far with a bullet in his leg." Madeline emerged from the cabin, the derringer still clutched in her hand. Carlos hurried to her side. "Señorita, are you hurt? When I heard the shooting—" "I'm fine, Carlos," she assured him, though her voice trembled. "Thanks to you and the sheriff." As the posse prepared to depart with their prisoner and the dead outlaws, Sheriff Dawson approached Madeline and Grant. "Miss Zimmerman, you might want to consider staying in town for a while. That fourth man is still out there." Before Madeline could respond, Grant stepped forward. "She'll be staying at my ranch, Sheriff. I've got room in Carlos and I can keep her safe until you catch the last one." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Sensible plan. We'll let you know when it's all clear." After the posse departed, Grant turned to Madeline. "I hope I didn't overstep." "You're welcome to stay in town if you prefer, but—" "No," Madeline interrupted. "Your ranch is fine. Thank you." Grant helped her gather a few essentials, and soon they were in Carlos's wagon, heading toward Grant's ranch as dawn broke over the eastern hills. The attack had changed something between them, accelerated feelings that had been building gradually. In the days that followed, as Madeline settled into Grant's guest room, they fell into a domestic rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. They shared meals, worked together on ranch chores, and spent evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. A week passed with no sign of the fourth outlaw. Sheriff Dawson reported that they'd tracked him as far as the territorial border before losing the trail. "Likely headed for New Mexico," he assured them. "He won't risk coming back this way." Still, Madeline remained at Grant's ranch, telling herself it was prudent, safer. But in her heart, she knew the real reason she stayed was the growing warmth between them, the way Grant's eyes followed her across the room, the electric charge when their hands accidentally touched. On a cool evening in early autumn, they sat on Grant's porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold, crimson, and purple. The air was fragrant with piñon smoke from the fireplace inside and the wild sage that grew along the creek. "I've been thinking," Grant said after a comfortable silence. "Your cabin needs more work before winter. The roof leaks and the walls need better chinking against the cold." Madeline nodded. She'd been putting off returning to her cabin, inventing small reasons to delay. "I should get back soon, though. Harvest time is coming." "What if you didn't go back?" Grant asked, his voice carefully casual. "What if you stayed here instead?" Madeline turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Irving?" Grant met her gaze steadily. "I'm suggesting that I've grown very fond of you, Miss Zimmerman, that this house feels more like a home when you're in it, that I'd like you to consider becoming my wife." Though she'd begun to hope for such a conversation, the actual words still took Madeline's breath away. "Are you certain? We've known each other barely 3 months." "I've never been more certain of anything," Grant replied, taking her hand in his. "I knew the day I met you at the well that you were someone special. Everything since has only confirmed it. You're strong, brave, kind. And if I'm being completely honest, the thought of you going back to that cabin alone keeps me awake at night." Madeline felt tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness but overwhelming emotion. "I've been afraid to admit how much I've come to care for you," she confessed. "After Michael's death, I promised myself I wouldn't depend on anyone else, that I'd make my own way." "And you have," Grant assured her. "You've proven you can survive on your own. I'm not asking you to depend on me, I'm asking to build something together as equals. Your land, my land. Our land." Madeline looked out at the ranch, the golden fields, the sturdy barn, the orchards beginning to bear fruit, and beyond to where her own small homestead lay. Together, they would make a substantial property, enough to build a real future. But more than the practical considerations, she thought of Grant himself, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the respect with which he'd always treated her. The way his smile made her heart flutter, and how safe she felt in his presence. "Yes," she said simply, turning back to him. "Yes, I'll marry you, Grant Irving." The joy that spread across Grant's face made him look younger, almost boyish. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "May I?" he asked, his eyes dropping to her lips. In answer, Madeline leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was tender, tentative, a promise of deeper passion to come. When they parted, both were breathless, smiling like fools. "Carlos will be insufferably pleased with himself," Grant said with a soft laugh. "He's been dropping hints for weeks. Is there anyone else we should tell?" Madeline asked. "Family," Grant shook his head. "No family left, I'm afraid. The war took my brothers and my parents passed years ago, but we have friends in town who'll be happy for us. The Sullivans from the cafe, Doc Peterson, even old Mrs. Abernathy might crack a smile." Madeline smiled at the mention of the well keeper. "I doubt that, but I'd like to invite her to the wedding all the same. If not for her stinginess with water, we might never have met." "True enough," Grant agreed, pulling her closer. "In that case, perhaps we owe her a debt of gratitude after all." They were married 3 weeks later in Quartz Hill's small church, with half the town in attendance. Madeline wore a new dress of pale blue calico, purchased with some of the coins found in Michael's hiding place. Grant stood tall in a black suit that Carlos had insisted on pressing 3 times to remove every wrinkle. Sheriff Dawson gave the bride away, and to everyone's surprise, Mrs. Abernathy herself contributed a 3-tiered cake for the celebration afterward at Sullivan's Cafe. "Never thought I'd see the day Grant Irving settled down," Tom Sullivan remarked, clapping the groom on the shoulder. "You got yourself a fine woman there." "Don't I know it?" Grant replied, watching Madeline across the room as she chatted with the doctor's wife. As fall deepened into winter, the newlyweds settled into life together at Grant's ranch, which they now called the Double Circle, combining the brands from both their properties. Madeline's cabin became a storehouse for the bountiful harvest from both gardens, its shelves filled with preserves and dried goods to last through the cold months. Grant proved to be a considerate husband, patient with Madeline's occasional homesickness for the East, supportive of her ideas for improving the ranch. Together, they expanded the orchard, added a flock of sheep to complement the cattle, and built a proper chicken house to replace the makeshift one at Madeline's cabin. Their physical relationship blossomed as well, initial shyness giving way to deep intimacy. Madeline discovered passion she'd never imagined possible, while Grant found in her a partner who matched him in enthusiasm and tenderness, By spring, Madeline had news that brought tears of joy to Grant's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, his voice husky with emotion. "You're certain, Doctor?" "Peterson confirmed it yesterday," Madeline said, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "He says the baby should arrive by late October." Grant gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. "I never thought, after all this time alone, to have a family." "Are you happy?" Madeline asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Grant replied, kissing her forehead. "Overjoyed, blessed, terrified, all of those at once." As Madeline's pregnancy progressed, Grant became increasingly protective, insisting on hiring additional help for the ranch so she wouldn't overexert herself. Carlos's nephew Miguel joined them, proving adept with the horses, while Carlos's wife Maria came 3 times weekly to assist with household chores. Summer brought sweltering heat that made Madeline's condition more uncomfortable, but also brought prosperity as their first cattle drive under joint ownership proved successful. Grant returned from Tucson with not only a healthy profit but gifts for both Madeline and the coming baby: a rocking chair for her, a hand-carved cradle for the child. "It's beautiful," Madeline exclaimed, running her fingers over the smooth pine of the cradle. "Where did you find it?" "Had it made special," Grant replied. "The woodworker in Tucson is from Pennsylvania too, said he'd put extra care into it when I told him about you." In early fall, as Madeline's time drew near, an unexpected visitor arrived at the double circle. Sheriff Dawson rode up one afternoon, accompanying a travel-worn man in a city suit who introduced himself as James Harrington, attorney at law from Philadelphia. "I've been searching for you for months, Mrs. Irving," Harrington explained as they sat in the ranch house parlor. "Your brother Michael made a will before leaving Pennsylvania. We were unaware of his passing until recently." Madeline glanced at Grant, puzzled. Michael had nothing to leave when he departed Philadelphia. What could possibly be in his will? "Your brother was more foresighted than you might think," Harrington said, opening his leather satchel to withdraw several documents. "Shortly before leaving East, he purchased shares in the Pennsylvania Railroad using money from the sale of your father's shop. Those shares have, shall we say, appreciated considerably over the past 2 years. He handed Madeline a bank draft that made her gasp. This can't be right." "I assure you it is," Harrington replied. "The sum of $2,000 plus interest. As Michael's sole heir, it's rightfully yours." Grant let out a low whistle. "That's enough to buy another 100 acres plus a proper irrigation system, or a proper school for Quartz Hill," Madeline said thoughtfully. "The town's growing and children are being taught in Mrs. Sullivan's back room currently." Harrington looked between them, impressed by their immediate thoughts of improvement rather than luxury. "There's one more thing," he said, producing another document. "This letter was among Michael's effects that were returned to our office. It's addressed to you, Mrs. Irving." Madeline took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her brother's familiar handwriting. "Dear Maddie," she read aloud, her voice catching. "If you're reading this, I've either found great success or great failure in my Western adventure. Either way, I wanted to ensure you had something to fall back on. Our parents always believed in preparing for the future, and this is my attempt to honor that teaching. Whatever happens to me, know that I love you and want you to find happiness. Your devoted brother, Michael." Tears streamed down Madeline's face as she finished reading. Grant put his arm around her shoulders, holding her close as she wept for her brother's foresight and generosity. "He was a good man," Grant said quietly. "I wish I'd known him better." Later that night, after the attorney had departed for the hotel in town, Madeline and Grant sat on their porch, discussing what to do with the unexpected windfall. "The school is a fine idea," Grant agreed. "But we should set some aside for our child's future as well." Madeline nodded, her hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked vigorously. "Michael would have liked that. He always valued education." She looked out at their land, silvered by moonlight. "And perhaps we could build a proper well in town, one that's free to all travelers." Grant smiled, remembering their first meeting, "with a plaque honoring Michael Zimmerman." "Yes," Madeline said softly, "so no one else will ever be denied water in Quartz Hill." 2 weeks later, in the middle of a clear, cool night, Madeline went into labor. Maria and the doctor were summoned, and after 6 hours of arduous labor, Grant Irving held his son in his arms for the first time. "He has your eyes," Madeline said tiredly from the bed, watching her husband's wonder as he cradled the tiny bundle. "And your determination," Grant replied with a gentle smile. "The way he announced his arrival, I thought the house was coming down." They named him Michael Grant Irving, honoring both Madeline's brother and his father. The boy was healthy and strong, with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that Carlos claimed could be heard all the way to the south pasture. As winter settled over Quartz Hill once again, the Irving family created new traditions in their home. Grant read aloud by the fire each evening while Madeline nursed their son. They celebrated Christmas with a small tree cut from their own land, decorated with painted pine cones and strings of dried berries. On New Year's Eve, with baby Michael asleep in his cradle, Grant and Madeline stood on their porch, watching as stars emerged in the clear desert sky. "Any regrets?" Grant asked, his arm around her waist. "About staying in Arizona, about marrying a rough cowboy instead of going back east." Madeline turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. "Not one," she said with absolute certainty. "This is where I belong, with you, with our son on this land." Grant lowered his head to kiss her, a kiss that still held all the tenderness of their first, yet had deepened with their shared experiences and mutual love. "Happy New Year, Mrs. Irving," he whispered against her lips. "Happy New Year, Mr. Irving," she replied, nestling against his chest as the first minutes of 1880 ticked by, bringing with them the promise of many more years together. In the decade that followed, the double circle prospered beyond their initial hopes. The irrigation system funded by Michael's unexpected bequest transformed their land, allowing for more diverse crops and greener pastures even in drought years. Their herd grew, as did their family. Michael was joined by twin sisters Emma and Rose in 1881, and later by another brother, Joseph, in 1884. The town of Quartz Hill prospered as well. The school that Madeline helped establish became known throughout the territory for its excellence, attracting families who might otherwise have bypassed the small community. The Zimmerman Memorial Well, erected in the town square, offered free water to all travelers, its bronze plaque telling the simple story of a young man who sought his fortune in the West and whose legacy helped the town flourish. Mrs. Abernathy, remarkably, became one of Madeline's closest friends in her later years, confessing that her brusque manner at their first meeting had stemmed from her own bitter experiences as a young woman. "The desert teaches hard lessons," she told Madeline once. "I'm glad you found someone who understood its gentler ones too." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant surprised Madeline with a trip to San Francisco, their first journey beyond Arizona since their marriage. As they stood on the deck of a ferry crossing the bay, watching the impressive cityscape, Madeline reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Grant asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About thirst," she replied cryptically. "About how desperately I needed water that day in Quartz Hill, and how that moment of need changed everything." Grant's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I've often wondered what would have happened if I'd arrived at the well 5 minutes later." Madeline turned in his embrace to face him. "I believe we would have found each other anyway," she said with conviction. "Some things are simply meant to be." Grant kissed her then, beneath the golden California sun, both of them thinking of a dusty well in a small desert town where their story had begun with a simple act of kindness, an empty canteen, and two hearts ready to find home in each other.